Imagine facing prejudice daily in a place that should be synonymous with care and empathy. Now, imagine a black nurse who, even in the face of public humiliation and constant exclusion, maintains her strength, fueled by the hope that better days will come. But what no one expected was that destiny had already placed a key piece in this nurse's life. What appeared to be just another silent patient, watching from his hospital bed, was actually hiding a powerful identity capable of changing the game once and for all. And when the truth finally comes out, a twist that no one imagined transforms everything. Will prejudice win, or will courage and justice have the last word? Get ready to discover how a simple nurse became the center of historic change, in a place where compassion should speak louder, but where reality turned out to be very different. If you're curious to find out how this incredible story unfolds, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any details of this exciting twist. Come with us to follow every moment of this journey of transformation and justice. Angela Parker, a young black nurse, had dreamed her entire life of being a healthcare professional. However, upon first entering the doors of the prestigious St. Mary's Hospital, that dream began to feel like an endless battle. Every step she took through the corridors was marked by looks of disdain and whispers that hung in the air, as if she didn't belong in that environment. Deep down, she knew that her journey would not be easy, but she did not imagine that she would have to face prejudice in such a direct way. Angela carried with her not only the desire to care for people, but also the responsibility to overcome the barriers that society imposed on her, a black woman, in a predominantly white environment. From day one, Angela realized that she would have to prove herself at every turn. She did not receive the same treatment as other nurses. On the contrary, every error, no matter how small, seemed to be amplified. Veiled jokes, scornful looks, and nasty comments came from all directions. It was as if she was constantly under a magnifying glass. And through it all, she kept her head up. She knew that her battle was not just for herself, but for all those who would come after her. The strength to continue came from her roots, from her family, who always taught her to fight with humility and never give up. But it wasn't easy. Every day at the hospital was marked by small dramas, small twists and turns that tested his patience and willpower. Angela felt like she was on an emotional roller coaster, not knowing what the next day would bring. However, she couldn't allow herself to give up. He knew that overcoming was the only way, and that every gesture of altruism he offered to patients was also a form of resistance. In moments like this, many would give up, but Angela had something more, something that kept her standing, something that pushed her forward, even when everything seemed to conspire against her. She remembered, from time to time, the words of her mother, a strong woman who always told her, "Daughter, the path will be difficult, but you were born to win. Don't let them bring you down." These words echoed in her mind as she faced prejudice at St. Mary's. Angela knew she was destined for something greater. She could feel it in her interactions with her patients, in the looks of gratitude she received from those who really needed her care. There, in that hospital, where there should only be compassion and empathy, she saw that the real battle was against something much deeper than she imagined: institutional prejudice. With every step Angela took, the pressures increased. The challenges seemed to multiply, but she refused to be defeated. His journey was marked by unexpected twists and turns, where, at times, hope seemed distant, but she believed in the power of change, and knew that true inspiration came from the most difficult times. And so, on each shift, Angela remembered what brought her here: her passion for caring for others, her empathy, and her unwavering determination to make a difference, no matter how difficult the path might be. And then, in the midst of so many difficulties, a small spark of hope appears. A new patient arrives at the hospital, observing everything with attentive eyes. Angela didn't know it at the time, but that man would be the key to the change she had been waiting for. Every interaction with him felt different, as if there was something more behind his seemingly silent presence. And so, Angela continued her journey, without imagining that she was about to become involved in a story of overcoming that would change not only her life, but that of everyone around her. At times, the feeling of being constantly evaluated was overwhelming, but Angela maintained her humility and focus on her work. After all, she knew that altruism and compassion were the pillars that supported her career. Even when everything seemed to fall apart around her, she found strength in her heart. And little by little, their efforts began to be noticed, even if silently, by those who really mattered. And so, Angela's journey continued, always marked by challenges and moments of tension. But deep down, she knew something was about to change. The pieces began. Dr. William Greaves, with his always impeccable posture and a cold gaze that seemed to pierce through anyone, was a figure of authority at the hospital. From the first day Angela introduced herself to him, the tension was palpable. Greaves didn't need to say much. The contempt was there, evident in every gesture and in the way he ignored her. The hospital was his territory, and Angela, in his eyes, was an intruder. And like any intruder, she should be put in her place. Deep down, she knew that the challenge she faced went beyond the hospital environment. It was a reflection of society. Angela felt the weight of Greaves' gaze every time she passed him in the corridors. There was something about the way he treated her that went beyond simple dislike. It was a silent disdain, as if his presence there was an affront. He always found a way to diminish your work, point out non-existent flaws, or question your decisions, all with a condescending tone. And so, the routine at the hospital turned into a daily drama. Each turn felt like a test of endurance, a struggle to prove he was more than Greaves's prejudices allowed him to see. Greaves' scathing comments did not go unnoticed by Angela's other colleagues. Although few spoke out, it was clear that he made a point of demonstrating, at all times, that he did not trust her. "I hope you live up to our standards, Nurse Parker," he said, his voice thick with irony. But Angela, always with humility, kept her head high. She knew that behind that mask of superiority, Greaves hid his own insecurities. And what really bothered him was seeing a black woman occupying a prominent space. It wasn't just the words that hurt, it was the actions. Greaves often relegated her to less desirable tasks or subjected her to greater workloads than other nurses. It was as if he was waiting for her to fail, to justify his discriminatory treatment. But Angela wouldn't give in. She knew that for every harsh word she received, she needed to respond with even more resilience and professionalism. And above all, she knew she needed to stay focused on her mission, caring for patients. This drove her forward, even when Greaves made the environment unbearable. At one point during a team meeting, Greaves made a point of discrediting Angela's idea, questioning her experience. The silence in the room was almost deafening. Everyone expected her to shut up, to accept the insult like so many others. But surprisingly, Angela maintained her composure and defended her point calmly and firmly, without getting worked up. This was a turning point, where many started to look at her with more respect, even if they didn't say it out loud. The altruistic behavior and humility with which he dealt with aggression began to gain strength among his peers. But even with these small victories, the feeling of always being under constant attack was overwhelming. Greaves seemed to have a particular obsession with bringing Angela down. Every interaction with him was marked by a power play, an attempt to reaffirm his authority and make it clear who was in charge. Angela, however, had already learned that true strength does not lie in those who shout the loudest, but in those who remain calm in the most adverse situations. And no matter how hard he tried, she continued to exceed his expectations, even if he would never admit it out loud. What Greaves didn't realize was that, little by little, Angela was gaining silent allies. Nurses and doctors, who had previously only watched from afar, began to realize how unfair the treatment she received was. They noticed how, despite all the difficulties, she continued to be the most dedicated professional. Each patient he saw left with a word of thanks and a smile, while Greaves remained closed in on his own arrogance. Angela, without realizing it, was inspiring those around her to see the true essence of their profession. And then, one day, something unexpected happened. In the middle of yet another of his criticisms, Greaves was interrupted by a calm but firm voice. It was Thomas Edwards, the mysterious patient, who until then had remained silent. He observed everything closely, and at that moment, something seemed to have changed in his posture. Angela didn't know, but that would be the first twist in a story that still held many surprises. What was coming was something neither of them could predict, and the impact would be much greater than anyone there imagined. Between the white sheets and the sterile walls of the hospital, a man observed everything in silence. Thomas Edwards, a seemingly ordinary patient, occupied a bed at St. Mary's without attracting much attention. He was there after an accident, without many visitors, and with a discreet posture. Angela treated him as she would any other patient, without imagining that, behind that attentive look, there was much more than she could predict. Thomas, with his serene eyes, observed Angela's every interaction with the other professionals, and, especially, with Dr. Greaves. The hospital didn't know it, but it was about to experience one of the biggest turnarounds in its history. At first, Thomas seemed like just another patient dealing with the recovery process, but there was something in his attitude that was different from the others. He asked careful questions, noticed details that went unnoticed by many. When Angela entered the room, he always watched her with special attention, as if he were studying every gesture, every expression. And as the days passed, his questions became more incisive. He wanted to know what her day-to-day life was like, how she dealt with challenges, and, most importantly, how she felt about the treatment she received from her colleagues. Angela, always humble, answered sincerely, but without revealing too much. She didn't want her problems to become a burden on the patient. However, little did she know that Thomas was absorbing every word, forming a clear picture of what was really going on behind the scenes at St. Mary's. At each new turn, he witnessed yet another scene of humiliation from Greaves, and his calm face began to show signs of discontent. Angela, in turn, continued to treat him with the same altruism as always, without suspecting that this man would be the key to a great transformation. Little by little, Thomas began to ask more personal questions. He wanted to know about Angela's trajectory, about her family, her dreams, her struggles. It was as if he was trying to deeply understand the essence of that woman who, despite everything, remained resilient in the face of so much prejudice. Angela, without understanding the reason for so much interest, responded naturally, sharing some stories from her childhood, her mother's advice, and how she always believed that overcoming was the only way to conquer her space. These moments of conversation began to create a subtle bond between the two, although Angela did not yet know the impact it would have on her life. Thomas, always attentive to details, also began to notice how other patients and nurses reacted to Angela's presence. He noticed the disdainful looks, the whispers in the hallways, and how some doctors, including Dr. Greaves himself, made a point of relegating her to despised tasks that didn't go unnoticed by him. In fact, each of these scenes reinforced in Thomas the need for urgent change in that hospital. But for now, he remained silent, keeping his thoughts and planning his next move. There was something intriguing about Thomas that Angela couldn't decipher. He was polite, discreet, but at the same time, he had a posture that seemed out of step with his status as a common patient. Angela, with her natural humility, could never have imagined that she was facing someone with so much power and influence. To her, he was just another patient who needed care and attention. But for Thomas, Angela's every conversation, every gesture, was living proof of how far she could go, if given the right opportunity. As Thomas continued his recovery, his admiration for Angela grew. He saw in her a strength that few people possessed. And as this admiration increased, so did her indignation at the way she was treated. He knew something needed to be done, but he was waiting for the right moment to act. And when that moment arrived, it would be a turnaround that would shake not only the hospital, but the entire structure that supported that system of prejudice and exclusion. The mystery surrounding Thomas only increased. He received few visitors, but the nurses commented on the frequent calls he made and received. Something seemed to be moving behind the scenes, but no one was sure what it was. Angela, in turn, continued with her routine, without imagining that Thomas's presence there was about to trigger a series of events that would forever change her life and the lives of everyone in that hospital. What no one expected was that the destiny had already been set and that the pieces of the game were about to reveal themselves. What was Angela facing at St. Mary's Hospital? Mary's went beyond simple personal disagreements. The prejudice that surrounded her was rooted in something much deeper, a system that, for decades, had allowed inequalities to remain untouched. For her, every day of work was a battle against institutional prejudice that manifested itself in subtle but constant ways. The jokes, the looks, and the administrative decisions that put her at a disadvantage were clear evidence that racism in the hospital was not an individual issue, but something systematic. It was as if an invisible cloud hung over the place, affecting everything and everyone, but being ignored by those who had the power to change it. Racism within the hospital was not limited to interactions with Greaves. He was present in the small attitudes of his colleagues, in the decisions of who would receive the best shifts, and even in the types of tasks that were assigned to Angela. The culture of St. Mary's was a culture of exclusion, disguised by fake smiles and cold protocols. The older nurses always found a way to keep Angela out of the important discussions, the most influential decisions. Even with her competence and dedication, she was seen as just a replaceable part. But behind all this barrier, Angela continued her silent fight, believing that personal overcoming would be the key to breaking that cycle. Angela began to realize that it wasn't just her who suffered from that toxic environment. Other nurses, especially those from humbler backgrounds, were also treated with disdain. There was a clear pattern. If you didn't fit the profile expected by the institution, you would be treated as inferior. And this went beyond skin color. It was a question of class, of status, of who you knew. Institutional prejudice was a well-oiled machine that, over the years, had been disguised as meritocracy. But Angela knew that what was at stake here was not merit, but rather a tradition of inequality that few had the courage to challenge. With each new interaction, Angela felt the weight of that system on her shoulders. Meetings with doctors were always tense, and any suggestions she made were immediately ignored. The other nurses, although aware of her competence, also did nothing to help her. It was as if everyone had accepted that this was the way of St. Mary's, and whoever wanted to survive there had to conform. But Angela was not the type to accept conformity. She knew that change would only happen when someone had the courage to confront this system, and even without having a clear vision of how this would happen, she continued to resist, an act of altruism not only for herself, but for all the other people who would come after her. What Angela didn't know was that Thomas Edwards also saw beyond appearances. He saw how that system was designed to maintain the status quo. In his silent conversations with Angela, he began to realize that the problem was not just in individual attitudes, but in a structure that needed to be dismantled. And although he had not yet revealed his true power, he was already beginning to plan how he could help transform this place. Thomas knew that Angela was the key to this transformation, and in time, he would reveal his plan. But for now, he watched, waiting for the right moment. Angela, on the other hand, stood her ground. Every day at St. Mary's was a new opportunity to prove that prejudice would not define her. His strength came not only from his professional training, but from his heritage, from everything he had learned from his family and his community. And even in the midst of difficulties, she could see a future where the hospital could be a better, fairer place. She believed that, with perseverance and courage, it would be possible to overcome even the most ingrained institutional prejudice. And soon, that opportunity would arise. There was an unsettling silence in the hospital corridors. Angela felt like something was about to change, but she didn't know what it was. Colleagues' behavior was beginning to change in subtle ways. It seemed that Thomas Edwards' presence was having a greater impact than anyone could have imagined. Angela knew change was necessary, but she wasn't sure how it would happen. She just felt that the hospital was about to face a decisive moment, and when that moment arrived, she would be ready to face it, with the same strength and humility that guided her there. St. Louis's institutional bias, Mary's, was an invisible but increasingly palpable barrier. Angela knew that her fight was not just for herself, but for all those who came before and would come after. And, even without knowing exactly how, she was sure that that structure would collapse. What she didn't imagine was that the missing piece for this fall was already there, in the silent figure of Thomas Edwards. The gears of destiny were already moving, and soon, everything that seemed unshakable would be put to the test. Despite all the prejudice and obstacles that Angela faced daily, she never lost her essence. His strength was not something that came from a moment of anger or despair, but rather from a lifetime of learning to overcome adversity. Each challenge she encountered at St. Mary's was further proof of her ability to persevere, something she had learned since she was a child. Angela often remembered the words of her mother, who always told her, "A person's strength lies not in never falling, but in getting up every time they fall." And it was with this philosophy that Angela faced every turn, every look of disdain, and every harsh word. She knew the path would not be easy. I knew that for every small victory, there would be many defeats along the way. But Angela believed that overcoming was more than a necessity. It was a choice. She chose, every day, not to let the toxic environment that surrounded her affect her. Instead of internalizing racism and exclusion, she turned it all into fuel to move forward. His patients were his greatest motivation. The gratitude in their eyes, the relief in their words when she served them, made Angela remember why she chose that profession. It was these moments that kept her going, even when the other professionals treated her as invisible. Even when griefs humiliated her in front of everyone, Angela knew that her mission was bigger than that. She was there to care, to alleviate suffering, and that was something no one could take away from her. The altruism with which she dealt with her patients was, in a way, an act of resistance. Every gesture of care, every word of comfort was a way of showing that, despite everything, she would not be defeated by a system that tried to erase her. At many moments, Angela felt on the verge of exhaustion. The emotional weight of being constantly undeserved was great, and there were days when she came home feeling like she couldn't take it anymore. But every time that thought arose, something inside her reminded her that the fight wasn't over yet. She remembered the long nights of studying, the sacrifices she made to get where she was, and how her family always believed in her. It was as if she carried, on her shoulders, not only her own destiny, but also that of many other women who did not have the same chance. Some days, Angela's perseverance was tested to the limit. There were moments when she wondered if things would ever change, if all her efforts would be recognized. But even in those moments of doubt, she knew that giving up was not an option. For Angela, each step forward, no matter how difficult, represented a small victory. She understood that true strength was not in facing challenges perfectly, but in moving forward, even when everything seemed to conspire against her. Angela's strength came not only from her will to win, but also from her ability to inspire others. Her colleagues, little by little, began to realize that, despite everything, she continued to stand out for her competence and dedication. And although many said nothing, Angela knew that her presence there was beginning to have an impact. She wasn't just resisting prejudice. She was showing everyone that, with perseverance and resilience, it was possible to overcome any barrier. Angela was a silent inspiration, who, little by little, began to change the way people around her saw the world. But the fight was not just for itself. Angela knew she was paving the way for future generations, so that other black nurses, other women, wouldn't have to go through what she was going through. And every day, it made her even stronger. It was not just a question of survival, but of overcoming. Angela was determined to make her mark at St. Mary's, not as the nurse who was humiliated, but as the woman who, with humility and perseverance, transformed the place forever. Angela was fully aware that there was still a long way to go. The battles she faced daily were small compared to what was to come. But deep down, she knew something was about to change. The pieces were moving, and Angela felt that destiny was preparing something great. She still didn't know what it was, but she was ready to face any twist that came her way. And when that moment arrived, she would be on her feet, ready to use all her strength and perseverance to transform her reality. Thomas Edwards was not just an ordinary patient. During the entire time he remained under Angela's care, he carefully observed every detail, every interaction, every demonstration of prejudice that the nurse faced. He knew that something needed to change in that hospital, but he had waited for the right moment to act. And then that moment arrived. The hospital was in an uproar. An unexpected turn of events was about to happen. Thomas, until then seen as just any patient, decided to reveal his true identity. And the impact of this revelation would be felt in every corridor of St. Mary's. Angela could not imagine that the discreet man, who had always treated her with respect, was actually one of the most powerful names in the healthcare industry. Thomas Edwards was the CEO of one of the largest healthcare conglomerates in the country. His presence there was not just an accident of fate, but an opportunity that he had decided to take advantage of to transform that hospital from the inside out. When Thomas revealed who he really was, the hospital came to a standstill. Everyone was in shock. Dr. Greaves, who until then had considered himself untouchable, was taken by surprise. The power he thought he had over Angela and the other professionals was about to crumble. The revelation was a sharp blow to the system of prejudice that dominated St. Mary's. Thomas, with his firm stance and incisive words, made it clear that the treatment Angela was receiving was unacceptable. But he didn't stop there. Thomas knew that the prejudice she faced was not an isolated problem, but a reflection of an ingrained culture that needed to be dismantled. And with the weight of his position, he began to devise a plan to transform the hospital. For Thomas, it was more than a question of justice for Angela. It was a matter of completely restructuring the way the hospital operated. When Thomas started to speak, the atmosphere in the hospital instantly changed. He was no longer just a patient, but a transformative force that would call into question all the discriminatory practices that had been swept under the rug for years. Angela, at his side, didn't know how to react at first. She never imagined that this seemingly ordinary patient, with whom she shared so many personal conversations, was actually the key to the change she so longed for. Thomas's humility, even in the face of so much power, was something that inspired Angela even more. Thomas's words echoed through the hospital corridors. He was not just there to expose racism, but to ensure that concrete action was taken. His every attitude made it clear that he would no longer tolerate the prejudice that Angela and other professionals faced. For many, this seemed like the beginning of a revolution. Thomas's posture was calm, but his actions were firm and determined. He had decided to use his position of power for good, and this decision would change not only Angela's destiny, but everyone who worked at St. Mary's. Thomas's revelation wasn't just a moment of exposition. It was the beginning of a transformation process. He made it clear to the hospital administration that, from that moment on, St. Mary's would no longer be a space where racism and prejudice would prevail. The changes began to be implemented almost immediately. Angela, who had previously been ignored and humiliated, now became a central player in Thomas's plan. Not only would she receive the respect she always deserved, but she would also play an active role in rebuilding that institution. And then something even bigger happened. Thomas invited Angela to lead a new diversity committee within the hospital. He knew she was the right person to help transform the culture at St. Mary's. For Angela, this was more than just a promotion. It was recognition of all his effort, all his strength and perseverance. It was a chance to make a difference in a way she had never imagined. The opportunity to be the voice of change, to make sure no one else went through what she went through. But that was just the beginning. The impact of Thomas's revelation would extend far beyond the confines of the hospital. What began as a simple intervention on behalf of Angela would soon turn into a revolution in the healthcare sector. Thomas Edwards, with his influence and power, was determined to take that fight to the next level. And Angela, with all her strength, humility, and altruism, was ready to face this new phase of her journey. A new era was dawning at St. Mary's, and it would be led by those who had been underestimated for so long. Angela Parker's life was about to take a turn that not even she could have predicted. After Thomas Edwards' revelation, there was no longer any way to ignore his presence and, above all, his competence. St. Mary's Hospital, previously dominated by a culture of prejudice and exclusion, now had the opportunity to transform itself into something better. And for this transformation, Thomas knew that Angela would be the key player. Not only did he recognize her strength and perseverance, but he made sure to promote her to a new role within the hospital, one that would change her career forever. Angela would now be the Chief Diversity Officer, responsible for ensuring that St. Mary's become an inclusive and fair environment. News of his ascension spread quickly through the hospital corridors. Angela, who until then had been the target of disdainful looks and nasty comments, now walked with her head held high, aware that her new position represented more than a promotion. It was a victory for all those who, like her, had faced years of exclusion and prejudice. But, contrary to what many might imagine, Angela maintained her humility. She knew that this prominent position came with enormous responsibilities, and she was not willing to disappoint those who now looked to her with hope. The first few days as Chief Diversity Officer were intense. Angela knew she would have to deal with internal resistance, especially from people like Dr. Greaves, who still didn't accept the idea of a black woman in a position of so much power. But Angela wasn't there to confront anyone. Her goal was to transform, and she believed that true change would only come with dialogue and action. Little by little, she began to implement new inclusion policies, ensuring that all employees had access to the same opportunities, regardless of their color, origin, or social class. And little by little, this change began to be felt. The altruism that always guided Angela in her care was now at the forefront of her new mission. She knew that the transformation of St. Mary's wouldn't be easy, but she was willing to do her best to ensure the hospital became an example of inclusion. The challenges were many, but Angela faced each one with the same determination she always had. For her, this was more than a change at the hospital. It was a chance to inspire other healthcare institutions to follow suit. His story was beginning to echo beyond the walls of St. Mary's, and the impact of its actions could already be felt in other hospitals. Angela's rise also represented an opportunity for those who had always been ignored. She began mentoring young nurses who, like her, faced prejudice and discrimination. Angela knew it wasn't enough to just change policies. It was necessary to support and strengthen those on the front line. Every conversation, every word of encouragement was a way to ensure that the next generation of healthcare professionals would not face the same obstacles. Angela was determined to be a leader who inspired empathy, strength, and humility, and this approach was beginning to bear fruit. Thomas Edwards, always present behind the scenes, continued to support Angela in every decision. He knew that the fight against prejudice was long, but he saw in Angela the leader that St. Mary's needed. And more than that, he knew that she was the right person to bring that change beyond the hospital's borders. Angela, in turn, felt increasingly confident in her new role. He knew that with Thomas's help and his own determination, he could transform not just St. Mary's, but the entire healthcare industry. Her story of overcoming was now a story of inspiration, and she was determined to make every step she took so far count. Former colleagues who previously treated her with indifference began to change their stance. Many of them even started looking for her for advice, something Angela would never have imagined when she started at the hospital. She was now an example that perseverance, when combined with altruism and humility, can lead to great achievements. But Angela didn't let success go to her head. He knew that his journey was just beginning, and that many challenges still lay ahead. True change, she understood, was not something immediate, but an ongoing process that required patience and a lot of dedication. Over time, Angela began to be invited to speak at other health institutions, sharing her story of overcoming and inspiring other people to fight for a fairer and more inclusive system. His voice, previously silenced by prejudice, now echoed in packed auditoriums. And with each new place she visited, she felt even more connected to her mission. Angela knew that what had started at St. Mary's was now taking on much greater proportions, and she was willing to take this fight wherever it was needed. The change she dreamed of was no longer restricted to a hospital, but became a movement. Angela's journey was far from over. Although her rise was rapid, she knew there was still much to be done. But with the support of Thomas Edwards and the strength that always guided her, she was prepared to face any obstacle. The future was uncertain, but Angela believed that, with perseverance and courage, it was possible to transform any system. And with this conviction, she continued her journey, ready to be the voice of those who never had the chance to speak. St. Mary's was forever changed, and Angela Parker was the living symbol of that transformation. Now that you've seen this incredible story of overcoming and transformation, the question remains: what would you do in Angela's place? Would he have the same strength to continue fighting against an unjust system, or would he give up at the first sign of failure? The truth is that stories like Angela's show us that true change begins with a decision, not to accept things as they are. Are you prepared to be the change you want to see in the world? Think about it. Plus, how about applying what you learned today? If at any time you feel underestimated or excluded, remember, humility and perseverance are powerful weapons. Use them wisely. Oh, and don't forget to share this knowledge with those you know. After all, inspiration and courage must be multiplied. If you like this story and want to continue learning more about topics such as overcoming, justice, and transformation, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any content. Your learning journey has just begun, and I will be here to guide you every step of the way.